What's up, everybody? Tim Anderson here, aka Renville, the bearded dwarven princess, back again for some more Rings of Power ranting. This morning, we're going to be diving into this fandom.com piece where they sat down with the actor Charles Edwards, who is playing the character of Celebrimbor. And this is a Rings of Power exclusive, apparently, from the other day called Everything You Need to Know About Celebrimbor. Now, there's a couple of things that I think they might be doing right here, but there's also, of course, as always, some stuff that I think they're doing incredibly wrong, or at least some things where they're taking way too much creative liberty, for better or for worse. Now, if you've watched any of my previous Rings of Power rant videos, you know that I tend to come down pretty hard on the rant side of everything because I haven't really felt like what I'm seeing that they're doing with Rings of Power is very positive. But I remain cautiously optimistic in the sense that I hope that when we get to see the final product, there are some things that I could take away from it and find that to be positive. Because at the end of the day, I do come back on the side of the fence of everything about Middle Earth. It doesn't really matter what it is. Any piece of gaming or media that points back towards the books and creates more knowledge for Middle Earth and more people reading Tolkien's work, that's never a bad thing. But of course, there's always the negatives too. But I do look at this piece and say, I see a couple of kernels in here, and I want to kind of talk about that. But before we get into the good kernels, we have to talk about the bad. So one of the first things that drove me nuts as I was reading through this, and it's down quite a bit. And this is where we're getting into this whole idea of the showrunners talking about how, we have to write the novel that Tolkien never wrote. Now, in some cases, they're inventing characters completely from scratch, which I take offense to. I take great offense to them doing a gender swap with the Baron Luthien story and just creating their own characters because they don't have the rights to those characters. And this is what's very important to me. If you don't have the rights to certain material and you don't have the rights to certain characters, then you shouldn't be touching them or doing anything with them. But of course, as we know, the current estate owners of the Tolkien estate don't really care about the sanctity of the material, and they care more about exploiting the IP for as much money as possible. That's why we're getting a version of a story that isn't really an adaptation in my mind, but more of a based upon the works of Tolkien. So here we get Charles Edwards, the actor here, talking about. He says, "What we're spoiled with in this enterprise, particularly in my case, is that Celebrimbor is mentioned in the Lord of the Rings as the forger of the rings, only briefly. He's not a footnote, but he's a side note." And here's where I get this really makes me laugh. The other sources for our shows is the appendices for The Lord of the Rings, in which Tolkien makes lots of notes and ideas about characters that aren't quite set in stone. Tolkien had 2 or 3 versions of Celebrimbor, none of which he settled on. And this is the part that I really focus on because it drives me nuts when they do this. There's actually a little note scrawled in a margin by Tolkien saying, not sure about this, should have changed it, or something along those lines. And in order to start building a character that's very exciting, there's a blueprint, but there hasn't been any coloring in, and it's down to me and everyone else to create him. That has been really exciting. So considering the 2 or 3 versions that Tolkien had of the character, which in themselves differ from each other, our version is a composite and then a little bit more. Now, I have previously stated that from my perspective, if you only have the rights to the Silmarillion, or whatever, then you only have to focus on that, which they don't. They only have the rights to the Lord of the Rings and the appendices within, as well as the Hobbit. And what they're mentioning here is there's a little note scrawled in a margin by Tolkien saying, not sure about this, should have changed it, and how the showrunners took that to mean, well, there's multiple interpretations of this, so we should just be able to kind of look at these 3 and make up our own version of it, and we should be good to go. Now, the reason I personally am nitpicking this, and again, this is a small nitpick. It's not enough to detract me from the show. It's just something I like to poke fun at, the same way I poke fun at the fact that bearded the women don't have beards, right? If you're looking at something that he scrawled in the notes, then you're not actually looking at the published material. You're going back to notes, from before the material was published. And I am very much, as a writer, as a creative individual who's in the published world, once something is published, it's done. It's set in stone. If you are the owner of that and you want to come back and revise it at a later time, you totally can. But if you're looking at notes from something that was written in the margins, should have changed that, maybe we'll change it, whatever the case may be. If it's from before the material was published, it doesn't count. What you have to look at is the published material. And if the author is still alive, then there's still room for that to be open to interpretation or to be changed potentially. George Lucas is a good example, continually, adapting Star Wars, or Stephen King continually adapting the Dark Tower trilogy as it went along in its evolution. Those two individuals are still alive and still could, well, at least in Stephen King's case, could still go back and revise things if he ever came out with another Dark Tower book. But I draw the line at a dead author who's dead and gone for many, many, many years, and we have a published work which specifically has a character written in a certain way, and if that's the way it is, then you shouldn't be going off the notes to make your adaptation. But again, that's me being a nitpicky, ranty little QQ. Which brings me to the point of the video where I actually want to talk about the positives that I'm taking away from this article. And it's one of the few times I've had a moment to be positive about what they're bringing to the show so far. But before we get into that, this is the point where I say, hey, if you like the video and you like my Rings of Power content, make sure to like, subscribe, hit the bell icon so that you never miss a video as I continue to expand on the Rings of Power series. And tying into this, of course, is the Mondays in Middle-earth show, where I read through, currently we're in the Two Towers, The Hobbit, The Fellowship of the Ring, The Two Towers, The Return of the King, and The Silmarillion, Mondays at 11 a.m. Central Time here on YouTube. And if you want to support the channel, which it would be awesome if you did as I continue my journey to full-time content creation here on YouTube, you can go down below to the super thanks option, choose an amount, $5, $10, $15, whatever you're comfortable with. Drop a super thanks on the video or join as a member of the Adventurers Guild. It's that option down there where we talk about a bunch of cool stuff every single month. There's lots of cool perks to being a member, lots of private videos and beyond. And of course, don't forget, we also have a Patreon page, patreon.com/wandering hermits. It's that world map behind me where my brother, my wife, and I are building the world, Weave in the Void. It's a 5th edition tabletop setting, a point-and-click adventure game, and a book series all over at the Patreon page. So check that out. Now, let's get back into sort of the positives about this article and what I think some of the things where they may be doing something right for a change. I know it's crazy, right? To think that they might actually, or at least that I might be seeing some good in all of this, which is there's always a glimmer of hope. So Celebrimbor is a character where, much like the actor says, there's not a lot to go on, which means that yes, it sort of is open to interpretation in a lot of different ways, because the only thing we really know about him is the fact that he was the forger of the rings. And he learned the ring craft from Sauron himself. And unfortunately, when he was making the rings, found out a little too late that the rings had been infused with this binding magic that he had been taught by Sauron. And ultimately, they were able to find out that they had been deceived soon enough that they were able to hide the 3 elven rings from him, but not the rest of them. Now, they're diving deep into the lore here of the first and second age with the character of Celebrimbor and who he is, what his lineage is, and we can pull that from this section here where they talk about Celebrimbor's background is detailed in the books. It extends back to the First Age. As a Noldoran prince, he was the last in the line of the House of Fëanor, the head of which was his grandfather. Fëanor himself was the son of Finwë, the first High King of the Noldor, also known as the Deep Elves. And Fëanor's greatest achievement was crafting the 3 jewels known as the Silmarils. These were the jewels, etc., etc., etc. So Celebrimbor has that lineage. He also took part in a number of battles during this war, and he eventually settled in Eregion during the Second Age, which is where the show picks up and finds him. So even though we don't necessarily have specifics about the character, we do know all of this stuff about the character. So what we're getting here is the history of the character, which is really cool. Because if we stick to what we know about the character, we know the setting, we know the place, we know the time, we know all these facts about Celebrimbor. If we're relying upon purely those facts, then we can actually create somewhat of a neutral character. Now, they obviously have taken some liberties here because the actor talks about how Celebrimbor he says, in our story, Celebrimbor is encouraging and assisting Elrond to visit Khazad-dûm to court the dwarves. He may have an ulterior motive for that, but Celebrimbor is very much in support of everyone working together. Neither race would have produced the wonders that they created without the aid of the other. So clearly, when a time of peace, Celebrimbor has a great respect for the dwarves. Does he, though? If he's exploiting them, we'll see. Dwarves have a reputation as being fanatical workers and jewelers and captors, and Celebrimbor very much respects that. Hopefully that is true, and he's not just looking at them to exploit them. Something that's mentioned here in the article, and I don't have enough memory, and I haven't read it yet to know if this is factual or not. They're saying that Celebrimbor was the one who invented the word mithril for the metal that dwarves work with, and I don't know that that's if that's factual or enough. Those of you who are Tolkien experts way beyond what I'm, capable of knowing, please drop that in the comments below because I don't know how much of that is factual or not. I'd love to know if it is factual or if that's just something that they're making up. Now, the actor here, Edwards, talks about how Celebrimbor is in pursuit of something bigger that no one else understands, and therefore he can be very single minded. He can use people, but just to get somewhere he thinks is going to be for the betterment of everyone and bring him great glory. He's very vain. So this is where I think we're getting the showrunners and the writers injecting their own interpretation of the character and saying this is what we think would be better for the storytelling component to create this character who has these character motivations or character flaws, etc. Um, it's an interesting take on things. If you have ever played the Shadows of Mordor games, I played them on the PlayStation. What is it? Shadows of Mordor. I can't remember the name of both the games. Anyway, Celebrimbor was in those games, and they gave a very their own take on the character. So, um, I know not everybody liked those games or liked the interpretation of those games. There's some Tolkien purists who won't ever touch those properties because they did wrong. They did Tolkien dirty. They changed all these things. As a gamer, I'm very familiar with what you need to do to adapt a property to a video game enterprise, not just as a gamer, but also as a game developer. And you can get away with a lot more in terms of, you know, a lot of more creative liberties can be taken when you have to break the third wall to make a game fun and to make a game entertaining. And they definitely broke a lot of rules when they worked with the character of Celebrimbor in those games. So again, Celebrimbor in my mind is a character that's not, he hasn't been written enough about to be breaking any rules, so to speak. So if what they're doing here, making him vain, making him all about the betterment of things, but also very, very much focused on, I want the glory for doing all of these things because it's in my heritage, it's in my lineage, and I want to be as good as my grandfather and father and so on and so forth. If that's his ulterior motive and that helps for the story of the show, I'm actually okay with this because of the fact that Celebrimbor is a character where we don't have a lot of information about him yet. It's different to me. It's very different to me than saying taking the character of Beren and Luthien, doing a gender swap on those characters, giving them new names, and putting that out there as this sort of like, look, there's another elf and human relationship, and we're going to make that central to the storyline. Inventing characters for the sake of writing the novel that Tolkien never wrote is something that I've been nitpicking at. But taking an existing character that hasn't had a lot written about him and putting a unique spin on it, maybe. I'd be interested to see where they take this character. So this article for me was very insightful. Again, I have a little few nitpicks, which we talked about at the beginning of the episode, but overall, I felt somewhat positive after reading this, which is one of the first times that I have felt positive about Rings of Power. That is not to say that I think the show is going to be good. I still think it's going to be a train wreck. I'm going to wait and see, like everybody else, but I have yet to see anything that makes me feel as though they are doing justice to the second age. I keep seeing all these woke agendas, like last week, the whole, orc females. We don't need no man. Like, ah. So, for those of you who are afraid that I'm jumping on the bandwagon and saying Rings of Power is going to be awesome and that's not the case, but I can see good in things, and I don't think it's all bad. And I just, as always, my rant videos are much more tongue in cheek than me genuinely being upset about things. Like, it's mostly just here for entertainment. Keep that in mind. Drop your comments down below. See everybody in the next episode. Peace.